Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about something that a lot of people can't seem to accept when it comes to their various weaknesses athletically on a main lift, sometimes even a movement pattern deficiency, and that's the simple fact that they simply need to get stronger. And a lot of people don't like to hear that. They don't want to hear that. They think that sometimes there's some little small exercise or a stretch or something that will fix their problem, or that maybe there is some corrective exercise that will sort their situation. But the simple reality is generally you just need to get stronger. That's your problem. So people will sometimes say, well, I would have gotten that deadlift had I done this different, right? Or I would have gotten this bench press lift had I just done something different, had my technique been a little better. And usually that's not the case. Occasionally that's the case. And that technical difference might make the difference between 5 pounds, 5 kilos, whatever system you're choosing to use there. That's usually what that difference will make. Now, is it to say that one of the muscles involved could have been stronger? Sure, we could look at sometimes a bench press and say, yeah, I would have been able to lift that if my triceps had been stronger. But triceps are a fairly big muscle. I mean, we think of them as a smaller muscle, but they're really not. They're the biggest muscle in the arm. Or if my hamstrings and glutes had been stronger, I would have locked that deadlift. Now that's an appropriate response, unless your form is just so bad. It's just so bad that that's what caused you to miss it. Like on a sumo deadlift because you looked down. Okay, now that might be worth 50 or 100 pounds on a sumo deadlift, right? On a lift like that, because that's an exercise to where if you do something goofy like look down, it completely changes your levers to the point to where they're almost unfixable. But that's a relatively rare occasion. That's because you're taking an exercise and taking yourself so far out of the bar path and movement pattern that you've turned it into an inefficient other exercise. On a conventional deadlift, that wouldn't actually happen, though. Same thing with your bench press. It's not just because you moved the bar through the wrong pattern, unless you just threw it up over your face on a raw bench, which you probably shouldn't be doing. But usually people just need to get stronger. They need to find their weak links and work on them. They need to find their weak links and work on them. And I'm not saying the strength, again, can't be part of a certain part of the range of motion. It could be joint angle specific, but people need to understand that they just need to get stronger. And it's oftentimes the same thing with mobility issues, compensatory strength. Right? A lot of these things that we think of as movement patterns. A lot of times people will look at something and say, well, I can't do wide stance deadlifting. I'm strong at the conventional deadlift, but when I go to the wide stance, a sumo or a wider stance squat, I just don't have any strength. And it's like, no, because you're completely weak in those positions. You have completely underdeveloped muscles. You have muscles in your lower body that are so weak and underdeveloped that you can't get within 50 or 100 pounds of your narrower stance. That's a muscular weakness. Okay, that's not because you lack some sort of flexibility. Not necessarily a lack of flexibility. Because if you can drop into those positions physically, if you can physically put yourself into that position, it's not a flexibility issue. Now, it could be a mobility issue, but what is mobility? Mobility is a strength component. It means you have underdeveloped weak muscles. And just because you deadlift 500 pounds doesn't mean that you don't have weak underdeveloped muscles even in your lower body. Just because you can Olympic squat with a narrow stance, 400 pounds, but you can't do anything when your footing goes out wider, doesn't mean you don't have weaknesses in your lower body, because you clearly do. Because realistically, unless you have a hip structure issue preventing it, most people, if your muscles were fully developed, probably be able to squat more weight with a wider stance. Right? You should be able to move more weight. It's not the high bar versus the low bar that everyone thinks, oh yeah, some people squat a lot more low bar. No, it's the stance width. It's the stance width. It changes your moment arms and your levers. But if you have really weak muscles in your lower body, you have really weak muscles in your lower body because you're not strong enough all the way around, then guess what? You might think that it's a flexibility issue, but no, it's a muscular development issue. It's a muscular development issue, and size equals strength. You just need to get stronger. You need to get stronger in those positions. You get stronger in those positions. Same thing when we're dealing with some sort of compensatory strength on a unilateral left to right side. Some people will shift or slide over. And then people will say, aha, see, there's a imbalance that needs to be corrected. We need corrective exercises for that. Well, you might need to do some one-legged work. That might be helpful. But maybe you need to accept that you weren't just weren't strong enough to lift that weight. You see people use compensatory strength like that when they're attempting to lift a weight they're not strong enough to lift. And they've gotten into the habit of using those little side movements to do that. I've noticed a lot of guys who are fairly new to the gym are really bad about doing that on benching and overhead pressing. What happens, especially when they're doing rep work, when things start to get a little bit squirrely because they're getting close to muscle failure, they'll start sliding part of their body under. I'll tell you what's happening, they're using bad form and creating muscle imbalances because they're using compensatory strength because they just weren't strong enough to lift that weight. Attempting to lift things you're not strong enough to lift on rep work, that creates muscle imbalances. Right? On big exercises. One reason I tell people don't grind big exercises to failure. If you feel like you can't get one more rep, that's where rest pause comes in. You see me doing that some of this stuff here. It's fine. Maybe that needs to be its own video. It needs to be its own video. But your solution there is to get stronger. Because if you just got stronger while maintaining a correct bar path, the problem wouldn't develop to begin with. Your solution here is strength. Solution here is strength. Generally speaking, getting stronger is a solution to most of your physical problems. It really is. Even for older people. I mean, look how many older people as they get older can't even sit down on the toilet sometimes without straining something. Well, what's causing that? It's a lack of strength. It's a lack of strength. And you just need to get stronger, people. Most of your movement problems, most of your compensatory strength problems, all this stuff is lack of strength. It might be lack of strength on one side of your body. It might be a lack of strength in your hips. It might be lack of strength in your triceps. But the problem is a strength issue. And most of that strength issue probably comes from a muscular development issue. You need to get stronger. But a lot of times when I'm saying stronger, I mean well-rounded strength. You need to get stronger all the way around. I mean, if you have a plane of motion that's a normal human movement pattern and you can't display strength in it, it's not some deficiency in a movement. It's lack of development. You have lack of muscular development in the appropriate muscles. Because it's certainly not neuromuscular at that point. I mean, let's come back over to the exact point we'll use about a narrower versus a wider stance. Telling me that a person who can Olympic squat 400 pounds or conventional deadlift 500 pounds doesn't have decent neuromuscular efficiency already? Of course they do. They have muscular development issues if they can't go to the wider stance. It's a muscular development issue. One of the reasons we need to push people early on to go into these wider stance movements, because it carries over just fine. Your wider stance carries over better to your narrower stance and vice versa. Now, upper body, it's a totally different beast. Totally different beast. So we're dealing with shoulder structures that are a little different. But definitely on your lower body, your wide stance stuff carries over completely to narrow. In other words, I can take someone who has never done a conventional deadlift and we can build their sumo up to 500. They can probably conventional close to 500 the first day they try the exercise, having never done it. Take people the other direction, what happens? You take someone who's never done a wide stance squat, who you build their conventional deadlift up to 500, and then they try to go wide, what happens? They can't sumo pull. They don't have the appropriate lower body strength through those joint angles. They need to get stronger. And to get stronger, you have to develop muscles. And oftentimes, developing muscles requires you to actually train them with volume through the appropriate movement pattern and range of motion. But generally speaking, these issues can be fixed by just getting stronger. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.